Hello everyone, my name is Candia Marca. I'm an English teacher and in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you a translation activity that you can implement with your students' classes if you are aiming to work or to include translation in your classes. Okay, the name of this activity is called Proverbs and Sayings, and as the name suggests, I'm going to be working with proverbs and sayings that do exist in the source and the target, which in this case is English and Spanish. Okay, so this activity was designed by me, and I'm going to mention some specific points before I present the activity. The first one is the target population, of course, which is a population I decided or I selected for this activity. Okay, this population is the UNACHI students from the bachelor's degree in English language teaching. Of course, as they are already studying the degree in English language teaching, their level is not initial. They have an English level that goes from a B1 to a B2, and that is important. I mean, it is important to consider that before you implement this type of translation activities because you cannot use translation activities with beginner students. They need to have a basis on the language before they are presented this type of exercises class. Okay, now let's move on to the explanation of the activity. Okay, the activity is called, as I said, Proverbs and Sayings, and I'm going to be working with these common phrases that are said in many different languages and that do exist in different languages. But the idea is that they convey a specific or a specific type of or form of life lesson or life advice, and they try to convince people about something specifically, something that happens in life. Let's so the idea is just to raise awareness about something that has to do with life. And we have some examples of them here. These are not the ones I included in the main activity. However, it's just to give us an idea of what a proverb is, just in case that we might not remember what it is. But for example, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. This is one of many different proverbs and sayings that exist in English and Spanish and different languages. Okay, so the idea once again is just to prepare people or to teach a specific lesson about the life to us. Okay, and now let's move on to the aim of the activity. The importance of this activity is to raise awareness on the importance of cultural aspects in translation. Proverbs exist in thousands of different languages, and most of them share the same life advices but with other words. That is important, okay? This is very important because most of the time when we work with cultural aspects in translation, it's not translating by translating. Like literally, I'm going to translate this into the target language and that's it. No. In fact, the aim of this activity is that to present to students the two different translations, how a proverb exists in Spanish and how they do exist also in English. But they are going to realize about those aspects that when they translate a cultural thing or a cultural phrase, most of the time the words that you choose in the target language won't have to do or with the original words you have in your native language, okay, or on the source language. No, they are going to vary, but this depends a lot on the cultural aspects of the target language, okay, or the target population. So that's why it is important. I mean, this activity is very useful when you want to raise awareness on this, on the cultural aspects and how they influence translation. So that is the main idea. And now students will have the chance of realizing about such aspects by translating, comparing, and matching common proverbs and sayings that are shared in both the target and the source language. As I said, the proverbs exist in many languages, but most of the time they convey the same meaning or they convey the same message with different words. And that's what we need to understand, that when you translate something that has to do with culture, you cannot translate it literally. Most of the time you'll have to make some changes, okay? And that's what I want to also transmit with this activity. Now let's get down to the presentation of the activity. So this activity was divided into two different stages. The first one is just to prepare my student for what's coming after, which is the main exercise. No? So in this first worksheet, as the instructions says, they need to check the following sayings and try to guess what their meaning in Spanish might be. Then they have to write their Spanish translation next to each proverb. Of course, before I give the worksheet, maybe I'm going to ask them like have you heard or do you know what a proverb is, and things like that. But the main idea of this first activity is just to give the worksheet and give them enough time to think about the translation of these proverbs that they have here. So in the lines, they have to write their Spanish translation, but according to them, like what they think it might mean in Spanish. For example, the first one, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Perhaps they haven't heard about this, or they haven't heard this phrase before. And maybe when they just check or take a look at the initial part of the phrase, a bird in the hand, maybe it can remind them of something they have heard in Spanish. But if they do not know or they don't have like any idea of what a proverb is, maybe it is going to complex the things a lot more, or perhaps they are going to start getting confused at the moment of translating. But that is the idea. I mean, they can resort to dictionaries just to look for specific words that is allowed. However, they cannot use any type of electronic devices because you know that if they just type the proverb or the saying on the internet, they are going to be given the accurate answer. No, and the idea is just for the idea is to let them think for a while about the translations of these phrases, but in Spanish. You know, now, after they have finished, maybe I'm going to like ask some of them to share what they just wrote. And then the second activity, which is connected to the first one, but of course I'm going to like give it in another worksheet as this one. And the instruction says, now match the English proverbs on the left with the accurate translation, with the accurate Spanish translation. Okay, now when I give this worksheet to them, they are going to start like realizing about these differences a lot more because they will say like, oh, so a proverb in Spanish is a refrán, is a typical phrase that we were all told once in our life, or that we are told once in our life at least, when people or especially adults want to give us a specific type of message about life or about our actions, etc. Okay, so now that they have the most common refranes in Spanish here on the left, it is going to be kind of easier for them to try to make or to go making connections and say like, okay, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Okay, is word maybe means like vale más, es mejor, something like that. And maybe by making those kind of connections, they are going to get the right equivalent or the right translation in Spanish of each of these proverbs. So once they have finished or they have completed this second worksheet, I'm going to check, of course, the answers with them. And at the end, I'm going to ask what they think about this activity. Like if they have thought about maybe making changes and then not all the time is just translating every word by word into the target language. That's it. No. When we work with culture, it is important to take into consideration those aspects. That the vocabulary you're going to use is not going to be the same, is not going to be all the time shared in both languages, or is not going to be the right equivalent translation from a language into the other. No, you will have to make lots of adjustments and changes to your final translation text, and especially with these phrases because they are cultural phrases, that are said in many different languages. Okay. And at the end, maybe I'm going to ask them just to choose one that they like the most. And in the following classes, I'm going to ask them like to tell or to pass in front of the class and just to say their proverb aloud, and that's it. Or maybe just to write a conversation and in which they have to include this type of proverbs, and that's it, so that they can also try to use it in a more native way as they would say it in Spanish, because those phrases do exist in our language most of the time. We hear them all the time, and that's the idea, that they start using these phrases but in a more natural way, let's say. Okay, and that's it. That is my suggestion of a translation activity that might work in your classes, and I hope you like it, and maybe you can also implement it if you like the idea, or you can also make some adjustments to it according to your target population, according to your needs, etc. Okay, and that's it. Thank you for watching.